everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the artistic, creative side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host. I'm a journalist based out in Reykjavik, Iceland, where, if you listened to last week's podcast, you might have heard me say that we did not have a volcanic eruption, that the earthquakes were rumbling on. But just hours after I had published it, the earthquakes stopped suddenly, and we did have a volcanic eruption. 30 kilometers from where I live, high in the mountains, in a kind of contained valley, a new volcano erupted and has been erupting ever since. I think it's been making the news around the world. There's been a lot of footage and photographs coming from there. So it's been kind of eventful here. A lot of people have been hiking up there. It's relatively safe if the wind is blowing from a certain direction, blows the gas away. And it's in a high mountain valley, so you can hike all the way up there and you can see the lava field kind of cradled in the mountains in a very conveniently sort of shallow and high spot. So I might actually try and get up there myself at some point. It's not very often that you get the chance to go and see a live erupting volcano with slowly flowing and drying lava, creating a new lava field. So that's been pretty exciting. It was kind of funny that it came out right after the last episode when I had just said no volcano, false alarm, and then within hours it was happening. But I haven't been able to get up there yet. A lot of my friends have. I've been following it on Instagram. It seemed like my Instagram has just been full of friends who made that hike. Apparently it's quite a difficult one. It's quite snowy out there still and quite steep, so you have to be prepared, and there's some quite steep climbs to get up there, but I'm going to try and find my way there. It really is like a once-in-a-lifetime thing, so, you got to do it, haven't you? But volcano news aside, I've had quite a good week in my gaming life. If you've been following the show lately, you'll know that I've been playing Fallout 4, but I've actually ground to a halt finally on that game after weeks of playing it pretty much daily. I reached a point in the story where you finally have to choose sides. You have to choose a faction that you're going to ally with and alienate other factions. And I've been in a state for quite a while in that game where I've been a member of several factions. I've been a member of the slightly militant Brotherhood of Steel, a member of the Underground Railroad that seeks to free synth robot people, and a member of the Institute, the kind of the dastardly organisation at the centre of it all, and a member of I wanted to say Watchmen, but it's not Watchmen. What is it? It's the Minutemen, a member of the Minutemen too. And so I've been just waltzing around the world basically with no one really attacking me and kind of friends with everyone. And I hit a spot where I had to make a decision, and I'm so bad at those moments in games. So I just kind of stopped. I was like, I don't really want to alienate any of these factions and have to fight them and lose companions and stuff. So I think I'm going to have to just take a little break on that one and come back later. It's very typical of me to kind of falter at those moments in choice-based games. But I will come back to that. I will finish it. I'm 2 missions from the end from what I can see online. So I have to get over the finish line with that game. It's been quite an epic game for me this year. I haven't looked at my hours count recently, but I'm guessing I'm on 50 plus hours by now. And I've really enjoyed every minute of it. I also dipped into Maquette again, the visually impressive first-person puzzle game that came out recently with the Wes Anderson visual style. I gave it another spin, but once again, I ended up bouncing on it. It has a love story at the centre of the game, so you'll solve some puzzles, and it's quite fun. They're a little blunt, the puzzles. It feels like you have to there's one object, one solution, and there's no way around it, no room for experimentation. You just have to find the exact right thing to do, which might sound like I'm just describing puzzle games generally, but for some reason in this one, it's been a point of friction with me that I felt a little stuck and without any wiggle room to really solve the puzzle. It's like you either get it or you don't. And I feel like in a lot of puzzle games, there are kind of ways for you to solve a puzzle. You really think your way through it, and you talk to people, or you kind of think your way around it. And in this game, it's really just, this object and this set of circumstances, and you either get it or you don't. So I've kind of not really enjoyed my time with it. Plus, there's a very cloying love story that every kind of couple minutes or after you've solved a puzzle, you'll get a voiceover of a very vanilla romantic relationship of some people meeting, getting ice cream, learning that they both like drawing. And I'm so irritated by it that I started muting those sections and just trying to get onto the next section of game. And at that point, I realised that I wasn't enjoying the puzzling or the story, and that I was just in it because I liked that genre of game and I'm waiting for it to click. And it just hasn't. So I think I might bail on Maquette. But there have been some other interesting developments going on. Sony released a new play-at-home series. This was an initiative that they released at the start of COVID, when they made the game Journey available for free for people that were kind of stuck at home and floundering in the new lockdown rules. They decided to throw them a game, and Journey was a really nice one to do that with. It's very relaxing and beautiful. And in the last week, they've released 9 new games on Play at Home, which are all available for free right now if you have a PlayStation 4. The games are Abzu, the diving game, very beautiful, Subnautica, another underwater game, Res Infinite, a super cool arcade shooter that I played in VR, a game called Thumper, which is a rhythm game where you play a kind of a sort of beetle-like creature on a fast-moving rail, and you have to kind of trigger switches in time with the really thumping sort of techno soundtrack. It's really cool. Also 3 PSVR games, all of which I've spoken about on the show, Moss, Paper Beast and Astrobot. Enter the Gungeon, which is the only game on this list that I didn't own because I didn't really fancy it, but seeing as it's free, I've downloaded it. And finally, The Witness. It's a game that I own on Steam, a seminal puzzle game and a very cerebral, almost legendary puzzle game where you walk through a kind of a beautiful open world environment, solving these strange puzzle screens with geometric line puzzles on them, with different rules of logic and different environmental clues. One of which that springs to mind is that there is a puzzle screen and you spend a lot of time just looking at it, trying to figure out what's going on with it, and then realize that the branches from the trees are forming a pattern of shadows across the screen, and you have to find your way through this maze of shadows. A really, really cool game. I played 6 hours of it on Steam, and I downloaded it on PlayStation 4. I might take a look at that one again, because it's not something that I've spoken about on the show, but it's a very Gaming in the Wild kind of game. So perhaps The Witness is one that I'll come back to. Anyway, those are all out there now. I think they're only up for a short while. So if you have a PlayStation and you somehow haven't heard about these free games that are up there, if you're an occasional player or your PlayStation is gathering dust, you can pull down a bunch of games. Horizon Zero Dawn, the classic open world epic, is apparently going to be added there soon, so there's another one to watch out for. But the main game that I've played in the last week has been Life is Strange. And I've been aware of this one for a while. It's a very pretty-looking, narrative-led game that seemed to me from the outside, as someone that hadn't played it, to be a kind of a teen drama game. And I was sort of semi-interested in it. But I downloaded the first episode for free on my iPhone. It's available on all platforms. And it's been sitting there in my games folder for quite a while. And just because I'd hit a wall with Fallout 4 and I was just browsing a couple things to try something out, I opened it up, and before I knew it, I'd been really swept in it. I've been playing it an episode a day for the last 5 days, and I just finished it today. And so I'm really looking forward to talking about that one today. But before I do, I will give a quick mention to the show's Patreon page. If you are a long-time listener of Gaming in the Wild, or if you're a first-time listener today and you like what you hear, you can support the show for as little as $1, €1, £1 a month by going to patreon.com/gaminginthewild. If you sign up there, you'll get an invite to our Discord community where you can chat with myself and other listeners and friends about what we're playing. You'll get extra episodes, you'll get sale recommendations for games on Switch and PlayStation, and lots of other good stuff too. So thanks to all of my patrons for supporting the show. It really helps me out. And if you are thinking about joining up, it's patreon.com/gaminginthewild, and thanks to you too. And with that out of the way, let's move on and talk about Life is Strange. So Life is Strange was released episodically. It's a game that came out in 5 installments in the year 2015. It's by a studio called Don't Nod, and it was published by Square Enix, who I think should only ever be referred to as Squeenix. It came out on the PlayStation 3 and 4, so it was kind of an generational game for consoles. It also came out on Xbox 360 and Xbox One, Windows, Mac, Linux, and later on Android and iOS, which is where I played it. I played it on my iPhone. I have a nice big screen on my iPhone and a backbone controller that I can just plug it into to turn it into a kind of a mobile phone switch. And I played it there, and it was very well suited and very well optimized for this little DIY handheld setup that I have going on. It was written by Christian Devine and Jean-Luc Cano, and the composer is Jonathan Morali, who did a great job with all the ambient music in the game. It does also feature some songs that you might know as well. It has in it some music by Bright Eyes, Amanda Palmer, Sparkle Horse and Mogwai, and bands like that. So it has a very nice kind of indie-ish sort of soundtrack going on throughout the game. It features a couple of notable voice actors in the game too. There's a fantastic central performance by Hannah Tell as the protagonist Max. Ashley Birch, who was later Ellie in The Last of Us, she plays Chloe. And Cissy Jones, who you might know as Delilah from the fantastic game Firewatch, has a role as Joyce, Chloe's mother. It's a popular game. As I've been playing it, I've been tweeting out screenshots and reactions, and I've had a really, really strong reaction from people on Twitter. It seems like it's a very well-loved game. A lot of people have a special place for this one in their heart. That's reflected in the critical response to, on Metacritic, it holds a score of between 82 and 85 across platforms. It was up for a whole host of Game of the Year awards. It won in the Games for Impact category at the Game Awards that year, and it also won a BAFTA for the best story. And it has sold very well. The most recent numbers that I could find were from 2017, when it had sold 3 million copies. It has since spawned 2 sequels, and there is a trilogy remaster coming later this year. So there's going to be a new opportunity to play the Life is Strange trilogy. I'm curious to see what they do with the remasters. It's definitely a game that shows its age, especially if it was in development for PS3 and ended up being one of those games that's on sort of the shoulder, the very tail end of a generation of consoles. So you can kind of tell it looks like it's from that era. It looks like a PS3 game, and it did run perfectly well on a modern iPhone, which is slightly miraculous to me still, but kind of understandable for a game of that age. And Life is Strange is a decision-based narrative game, but I was interested to see that on the Wikipedia page for it, it's referred to as a graphic adventure. And that reminds me, I associate that genre with 2D point-and-click games like the Secret of Monkey Island and the Beneath the Steel Skies and all of those old LucasArts games. And I guess I can see why they would call it a graphic adventure. It's in the third person. You play in the third person. You play behind Max, like a camera looking over her shoulder, and you run around as Max in a really, really well-realized 3D world. But it does feel like, with the way that you interact with objects and the way that you have these kind of branching dialogues, it's probably, if you laid it down on paper, not dissimilar to those old graphic adventures and those old point and clicks from back in the day. And that's not the only way in which this game is nostalgic. It has a kind of an air of nostalgia that bleeds through all aspects of the game. It's ostensibly set in 2013 in an Oregon town called Arcadia Bay, a seaside town that's a little bit run down. And you play as Max Caulfield, an 18-year-old student who has just come back to town to get a scholarship in the prestigious Blackwell Academy, where she is studying photography. And she interacts with her friends and her classmates. She has Chloe, a kind of a punky, blue-haired dropout who is her best friend. And she has to deal with Victoria, a rich kind of Mean Girls type character who has a little kind of entourage of Mean Girls. And then there's Kate, a Christian student who has some kind of secret trauma around her that will become apparent through the story. There's a guy called Nathan in the course, in the photography course. He's the kind of sort of unhinged heir to the Prescott empire, the Prescotts being a local family of note who are buying up the town. And various other characters, such as Warren, the kind of the guy best friend character, who has a bit of a crush on Max. And there's a kind of a supporting cast of nerds and jocks and social climbers and do-gooders, and it's very kind of classic in that way. It's a very referential game that you'll feel very comfortable in, that you can orientate yourself in very quickly. And the nostalgia of the game is kind of intense. It reminded me straight off the bat of My So-Called Life. And I'm showing my age a bit by talking about that. I guess it's a cultural reference that will be lost on anyone born this side of the millennium. But it was a 90s kind of drama, teen drama, set in the grunge era. And this game feels like it's set in the grunge era too, despite being in 2013 ostensibly. There's a lot of music that fits that kind of grungy, kind of finger-picking vibe, like the music that we're hearing now. It also is a little bit... I mean, there's a whole list I've written down here of references for the game, like Stranger Things. There's a kind of a supernatural element to the game, small-town supernatural drama, teen drama. Donnie Darko is a reference point for it too, that kind of moody college-age period piece with well-placed music and a kind of a supernatural mystery to be solved, or paranormal mystery. It also reminds me a little bit of Top of the Lake, if you've seen that one. It's the Jane Campion-directed rural crime saga. It has aspects of that to it too, that feeling of being kind of far from the big city lights and caught up in the politics of a place where there aren't that many people around. It reminded me also of the OA. And there's a kind of a Sofia Coppola vibe to it as well. I think the main characters being teen girls reminded me a bit of Sofia Coppola's work of Lost in Translation and The Virgin Suicides, and these places where you get a kind of an intimate read of a strong female lead who is in her teens or 20s. And there's a very Netflixy feeling to the whole thing as well. And I say that in a good way. It's a game, the five episodes, and there's always a gripping intro, a good story throughout, and then a kind of a cliffhanger ending that makes you want to just hit play on the next episode straight away. I played this game in 13 hours. I think the first 3 episodes are 2 hours each, and the final 2 are 3 hours. So you can sit down in an evening and play an episode, and it will take you about the length of a movie. As far as games go, it reminded me a lot of Detroit Become Human, the choice-based David Cage science fiction game. But I think my pool of reference for games of this type is a little shallow. Other people have described it as being very close to the Telltale games, these kind of choice-based games based on things like The Walking Dead and Batman and stuff like that. But I haven't played those. Maybe I will take a look at them, as I enjoyed the format of this game quite a lot. Also, Beyond Two Souls, another David Cage game. But it's a little more primitive in some ways than Detroit Become Human, which came a few years later and was very cutting edge and very expensively produced. But I think it also has a lot more heart than Detroit Become Human. I think David Cage's choice-based games can be a little cold. I think the writing can be quite cold and very masculine. I was quite surprised to find out that this was written by 2 lead male writers, as it is quite sensitively written and intimate. And that sounds like a kind of a terrible burn on male writers, but often you'll find men write women badly, and I actually thought the women in this game were quite well written, although I have seen a couple of responses online from actual teenage girls who have said on Twitter that they felt that the writing was clumsy. So there you go, it probably depends on which angle you're coming at it from. The game is also packed with pop cultural references, such as Twin Peaks, Donnie Darko, Twilight Zone, X-Files, Blade Runner, Groundhog Day. Like the script is peppered with references to pop cultural material, and that also places it earlier than it's actually set to me. Things like Twin Peaks and X-Files and Groundhog Day, they're all very much of the 90s, and so that grungy soundtrack and that kind of halcyon nostalgia that runs through the game, the kind of the college campus environment, the different tropes characters that you'll meet, like the nerds and jocks and so forth. Has that kind of John Hughesy vibe to it, although nowhere near as light. But you could almost look at Breakfast Club and kind of put a pin in a different character and say, yeah, she's Ali Sheedy and etc. And she's Molly Ringwald. But the main character of Max Caulfield is definitely like a kind of Claire Danes in My So-Called Life. Kind of well-meaning, generally well-liked, kind of appealing character with a kind of a soft edge to her personality. She has a very nice soft voice, and she's kind of polite and well-meaning to all of her classmates and friends, although you can play Max in various different ways, more of which later. I think that aspect of the game is also aided by the incredibly detailed, incredibly lovingly created game world. The town of Arcadia Bay is fantastically made, from the diner environment, which has like a jukebox and has like the stools at the bar and booths with worn leather seats and cracked tiles, to the houses that you'll go into, and you'll get like a different feel for families and their houses. Like Chloe's house is a kind of a small house that's a little bit run down with kind of damp looking wallpaper and kind of peeling paint and faded pictures pinned up and that sort of thing. And the school as well. There are so many things that you can look at and absorb as you're walking around. And that's a central aspect of the gameplay too. It's taking in the environment. That really is the key to this game in many ways. As you're walking around, you will see little text dialogues floating up in front of you with a little line pointing to something, saying something like magazine or flyer or letter. And you can go over to these different objects and look at them and zoom in on them and read them. And a lot of them are just ephemera. Some are plot essential, or you have to find them to progress, like quest items, but many of them are just for colour. And there is so much colour in this game, so much colour in the environment. It's very, very well crafted. There's lots also of good light. There's lots of sunsets. There's lots of kind of fast-moving weather and very dynamic light. And it really does make for a really cinematic play. Very, very satisfying, very, very engrossing. There's a lot of things happening in that game world to really reel you in. I have very strong memories of some moments from the game. For example, towards the start of the game, when Max first emerges from the college building, she steps out into a grassy kind of open area on the campus. And you can see some kids throwing a ball around. You can see some kids on the other side of the park who are skating. You can see someone flying a drone. There are people lying around under the trees, and it feels like you've just stepped into a real world location. It feels like, I heard this mentioned on another show, but it feels like the world was running before you arrived, and you've just stepped in to a real scenario. And that's quite an achievement in some ways. I think often games can feel like just a kind of a relay race of scenarios that have been built for you to walk through. But this one really does feel like you're a person moving through an environment in which other people are going about their lives. And that's no small achievement. And it really does add a lot to the experience of moving through the game world of Life is Strange. And now I'm going to try and talk about this game without giving away any spoilers, unless there's a little spoiler break at the end, but I'll be very careful and make sure that you know if I'm going to spill any big plot spoilers. But the story of the game is that, Max has just arrived back in town. She has a scholarship, she's going to the photography school, she has big dreams of becoming a photographer, she has a Polaroid camera and she uses them for selfies or self-portraits. She goes to class, she hangs out with Chloe, her friend, they get into scrapes together, and there's more going on in this town than first meets the eye in Arcadia Bay. There is a missing girl, and you'll see posters for her all around the college campus and all around the town. And Chloe knows the missing girl, and there is also the Prescotts, this family of note, of great wealth, who are kind of buying up half the town. There's like a little tourist kind of area and a seafront with different people. There's a dealer that lives down on the seafront in an RV you'll encounter him, and all of these characters are kind of interwoven in a small town sort of web of intrigue, and Max and Chloe start to investigate the missing girl case. The local police are well known to be in the pocket of the Prescotts, and Max and Chloe believe that Nathan Prescott is involved and that perhaps there is a cover-up going on. This is all in episode 1 towards the start. But one of the key mechanics of the game, and the thing that takes it into the science fiction, supernatural, paranormal genre, is that Max discovers towards the start of the game that she has the ability to, at times of stress, wind back time. She can wind back time by a few seconds, and she can watch events play out again. She can carry out actions that might influence the course of events, and therefore influence and produce alternate outcomes. And this is a really, really interesting mechanic in the game. It means that for a choice-based game especially, it's very cool as a game design feature, because it means that if you pick a conversation choice, for example, if you're questioning a local policeman and you are a little too obvious in your approach and he shuts down, you can just wind back the conversation and try a different approach. And so you have to use that mechanic in that way in conversation. You also have to use it in some dramatic scenarios. For example, let's say someone is in a danger of being hit by a truck, or you see them even being hit by a truck. You can wind back time and you can try and shout out and warn that person. But Max doesn't move when she winds back time. So there are also environmental puzzles. Say you have to cross a floor that is blocked by, let's say, a gushing fire hydrant, and she can't get across because the water's moving too fast. You can carry out some actions that will block the hydrant, walk across, and then rewind. The fire hydrant will keep gushing, but Max will be on the other side. And so there are various ways that you have to use this time-winding mechanic to progress through the game. And it's a really cool feature of the game, and lifts it up from being this kind of small-town crime saga, teen drama, to that kind of Stranger Things sort of extra level of intrigue, and that's really helpful for the game. But as well as all this, the game actually tackles some really, really serious subjects. It really doesn't shy away from them either. It really takes them on. For example, on the college campus, all kinds of stuff is going on. There is a girl who has been rohypnoled and videoed kind of out of control at a party and is being kind of bullied and shamed on the campus, which is affecting her mental health. There are themes of mental health and suicidal thoughts and self-harm. There is a strand of plot that is to do with domestic violence. There is a strand of plot that is to do with homecoming veteran trauma. And there is kidnapping, and there is gaslighting, and the story really does go to some quite dark places. And I'm not spoiling it by saying this. I mean, this is all pretty apparent from the outset that there's a lot going on in this town. There is a lot going on in the lives of the various characters that you'll encounter. And the game is quite unflinching in how it looks at them, in my opinion, to a degree that I found quite surprising. They're very mature themes in the game. It should have a big trigger warning slapped onto it because there are some quite traumatic events that happen throughout the game. And so, yeah, that's just something to bear in mind. If you're sensitive to any of those things, that life is strange, despite all of this kind of good-natured nostalgia, it does also go to some pretty dark places. But I had a great time with this game. I really enjoyed it. I got very sucked into it. It really progresses in a very interesting way. From episode to episode, new mechanics are introduced. Max's relationship to her abilities deepens as the game progresses, and so there's always something around the corner that you're not expecting, like new things that Max can do. The different plot strands all come together in really interesting ways. There are twists. There are lots and lots of twists in this game, things that you won't expect, shock outcomes and things like that. And obviously Max being able to deal with time is kind of in the eye of the storm. And she's trying to be a good student. She's trying to be a good friend. She's trying to reacclimatize to life in this town. And as she goes through this, when you carry out actions that are noteworthy in some way or will affect the future, there is a little scribbling sound in the corner, and you know that you've just done something that will affect the rest of the game. And this can be anything from saving a girl from being like soaked by a passing car going through a puddle, through to actual kind of life and death events. And everything affects something, even if it doesn't affect the game in a big way. I mean, for the most part, it is a fairly railsy kind of narrative experience, with the illusion of choice around you all the time. But you're actually just experiencing a story that is perhaps more cinematic than choice-led, even though you're constantly making choices. But the small choices that you do make, for example, how you treat people. If you treat someone well, then later in the story they might be more open to helping you out, or you might, like, your reputation might change, or the way that the different characters view you might change, and you can get kind of smooth outcomes where you've kind of come through interpersonal difficulty, or you can be a bit more tough, and you can come through the story with Max as a more kind of independent character who's not afraid of setting boundaries and pushing back. And so you can play Max in different ways. You can kind of, at the end of each episode, you'll get a little rundown of the choices that you made and the things that you could have done differently, and the story elements that you might have missed, because there is so much to look at in this very juicy, rich environment, and on each kind of the timeline of each chapter that you're playing through. And these vary, it's from like whether you watered your plant, and your mum will ask you about that later. So the little choices that you make can affect these little tiny interactions in really interesting ways. It's very cool. It's a very well put together game. So I'm not going to spoil it, so I'm just going to run through a few of the best things and a few of the worst things that I thought about this one. It's not a game that is perfect. It does have a few flaws to it. It does show its age. Some of the slang in the game and some of the script is a bit rough. Like the way that the girls talk about grinding skateboards and thrashing at parties and getting my smoke on and all this kind of stuff. It's pretty cringeworthy at times, to be honest. And that's on the writers, you end up kind of smirking at the writers a little. But to a degree at which it's almost endearing. Like I found myself kind of smirking and eye-rolling, but kind of enjoying it in a way. And some of the voice acting is a little uneven, despite some really stellar central performances from Max and Chloe. Both of them are flawless and wonderful and deservedly won some awards. A lot of the male voice actors are pretty bad. Like, the really aggressive, nutty, kind of rich kid character is just constantly kind of snarling and sneering to the degree at which it's very, very, very stagey and kind of ridiculous. Chloe's stepfather is also a veteran, and the actor is constantly performing at a 10, when really he should dial that right down to a 4, and it would be much more believable. And sometimes the recording is actually really uneven. Sometimes I felt like the sound quality of some of the voice acting had been, recorded in a wardrobe, and didn't really sound like, if they're walking down a street and it's just this very, very tight sound, it can take you out of it a little bit. Also, I'm actually a big fan of the look of this game. I think it has a really nice art style. It's kind of, it's not trying for realism, but it does have a kind of a nice smudgy, kind of dreamy quality to it. And I really like some of the animation of the kids skating and the physical animations. But sometimes the faces look very, very plasticky, and the lip sync is not in time with the words at all. And so if that's something that bothers you, that's really going to bother you, because it's actually very bad in this game. The lip sync is off throughout, and the facial animations they look nice in screenshots, but they're really bad in motion. As for the gameplay, I found it quite effortless for the most part. But there were times at which I found myself walking in circles trying to trigger one small action. For example, there's some mean girls blocking the steps into the dorm at one point, and you know that you have to turn the sprinklers to spray them and get them to move, but you can't do it. You follow the sprinklers back to the hose pipe and the tap, and she even sees the tap and said, that looks easy enough, but you cannot do it until you've carried out some other quite obscure action. And there's a problem with that sometimes. Like, you'll be in the right place with the right idea, but for some reason you have to carry out something silly first before you can do it. And the context of the action that you can carry out changes after you've triggered it. Without wishing to spoil it, of course, I mean, there is a dramatic, big ending to the game. I was medium satisfied with the ending. I felt like the final act kind of lost its way a little bit, which was a little bit of a bummer for me because I had enjoyed the writing throughout the game. There's a couple of puzzles where at the end I had to look up a solution. For the first time in this 13-hour game. It's like the 13th hour, and suddenly I'm stuck and frustrated, which is really, really tripping at the finish line, if you ask me. And it turned out that it was actually a technical problem, that I'm supposed to be following a voice, and that voice was just not present in the iOS version of the game. So I was just walking in circles, and it wouldn't have been possible for me to solve that puzzle without help. But the good things really overshadow all of those gripes. Max and Chloe are fantastic. They're fantastically written. They really do come off as believable best friends. They have great chemistry, and they're really well voice acted. The environments and the people, the scenery and the set pieces, and the details of the college campus and the dorms and the town and the diner, all fantastic. There are great kind of story beats throughout, and things like just uncanny events like birds dying suddenly, being a sign that something is really wrong, and the way that Max kind of floats in and out of her visions and her daily life, and she has to balance attending class, texting her mom. There's a kind of a mobile phone system where you get messages that lead you through story events. Max has a diary that you can read where she writes her in-depth thoughts, and so it's very much that you're along for the ride with Max rather than inhabiting Max. Max is very much her own character. And you can kind of influence her in this way and that, but you never really get to fully inhabit Max as a character in the same way that you do in other games. I felt very comfortable with that. I've read that some people weren't so comfortable with that and felt that there was a lack of control in the game, but for me it was very, very satisfactory the way it was all put together. I also really liked the way that the game incorporated cutscenes. So cutscenes take place, there's dialogue that takes place, and then without missing a beat, the camera will settle behind Max and you're in the game. So it really does feel that you're kind of moving through this kind of Netflixy watching of a cinematic narrative experience, but then you're silkily placed into the action in a really cool way. I felt like that was very, very well balanced. Also, I mean, there's scenes, for example, like when Max gets a bus and she puts on her headphones. Whenever Max puts on her headphones, you'll get a song. You'll get a Sparkle Horse song or a Bright Eyes song. And those were really well integrated, and they really helped with the atmosphere. I love music in games. I thought both the original music and the tracks that they had picked for the game are fantastic. And it's not a hard game for the most part. You can solve the puzzles pretty easily. There are a few kind of fetch questy ones. For example, you have to find 5 bottles in a junkyard so that Chloe can have a little shooting practice, and you run around the junkyard, and it could have been boring, but because of the lovingly crafted environment that you're walking through, and there are so many things to look at, like, you know, piles of old crap and like someone's shirt and dolls and burned magazines. And so as you're walking around the junkyard looking for these bottles in what could have been quite a boring passage of play, I just found myself being further absorbed into the game world. And I also like the fact that it didn't lean too hard on the paranormal aspect. You know, it could have been very easy for the game to be all about that, but it's not. It's multi-layered. It's about the different relationships that are going on. It's this kind of coming-of-age moment. It has this kind of dark kind of crime thing going on too. And then on top of that, there is the kind of the ability that Max has to manipulate time, and the kind of the spectre of this tornado vision that she has looming over everything. And so it's a really nicely multi-layered story. Like, Chloe has her own shit going on. She has her own psychological circumstances and traumas that she has been through. All of the characters have like a realistic backstory, even if they do lean on tropes of characters that we will have seen before. They do it in a good way. Like, it gives us access to these characters, but then there is more depth that is presented throughout. So I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was a great game. It was nice to play it on the phone, actually. I liked playing it kind of kicking back on the sofa. Although I think with the visual qualities of it and the detailed game world, it could be nice on a big screen too. So the remasters are coming out later this year. It might be a really good time to pick up the trilogy if you're thinking of playing it. It will be on, I think, all of the modern consoles and Steam and so forth. So yeah, a big thumbs up from me, big recommendation. I really enjoyed Life is Strange. So that's our episode. Thanks very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear from you if you've played Life is Strange. You can find me on social media as Gaming in the Wild. My main platform is Twitter, so come tweet your opinions about the game at me. I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, Twitch and YouTube, all as Gaming in the Wild. If you've enjoyed this show, if you'd like to support the show, the Patreon is at patreon.com/gaminginthewild. I'll be back next week with another episode and another volcano news update maybe. Maybe I'll even power through Fallout 4, or maybe I will play something else completely. I've got a great slate of games coming up with Immortal Phoenix Rising, with Orwell's Animal Farm, Mirror Moon I picked up on Steam. There are a whole host of games that I'm planning to cover soon, so stick around for that. Also, if you're listening on iTunes, I really appreciate dropping a 5-star review on the podcast, or a 1-star review if you hated it, and especially if you write reviews. This really helps the podcast to rise up the search ranks as people are searching for games and games podcasts, and for the show to grow its audience and find more people. So thank you very much if you have the time to drop a review. This has been Gaming in the Wild. Take care of yourselves and each other. Bye bye for now.